that, President Truman's inauguration speech in 1949, and then we'll be back here for more of our live coverage of the 52nd presidential inauguration.
Don Ritchie, historian of the United States Senate, as we continue our series on presidential inaugural addresses. Next is Harry S. Truman's in 1949, January 20th. This was the first to be held in January. Why?
No, actually, FDR's in 1937 was held in January. This was after the 20th Amendment to the Constitution had been adopted, and the inaugurations were moved up from March to January. Actually, that was done in part to regularize both the congressional term and the presidential term, and to reduce the amount of time between the election and the inauguration.
Truman had already been president. In this case, he was inaugurated. Tell me a little bit about the background.
Well, he's at the end of a very dramatic presidential election. Harry Truman had been vice president in 1945 when Franklin Roosevelt died. He'd been thrust into the presidency at a time when no one believed anyone could follow FDR, who'd been a 12-year president and a tremendous leader. Truman's popularity had been very low for much of that period. He'd gone through one crisis after another. And he'd gone into the presidential election way behind Thomas E. Dewey, the Republican governor of New York. The magazines referred to the next president of the United States when they ran pictures of Dewey. Everybody except for Harry Truman thought that Harry Truman didn't have a chance. Instead, he won that election. It made everybody feel good, I think, about the sense that the underdog came back. His inauguration had to be a great moment of gratification for him, of having achieved that, and now finally being able to be president in his own right, elected on his own by the people, not having received the office through the death of his predecessor.
Perhaps the most memorable photograph from that era is the one of Harry Truman holding up the newspaper with the Dewey defeats Truman. I'm sure many, even of our younger viewers, have seen that over time.
The Chicago Tribune published Dewey defeats Truman. They just couldn't believe it, even as the statistics were coming in. They were sure that the vote was going to change.
Our presidential inaugural address series, our two very special guests setting the stage for us in each of these are the historians of the United States Congress, Don Ritchie, who's over on the Senate side, and Raymond Smock, who is in the House of Representatives as the historian. Ray Smock, tell me a little bit more about your sense of the era around Harry Truman.
Well, Harry Truman is the first president of the Cold War, really, the end of World War II and the beginnings of the Cold War. And you see that in his inaugural address in 1949, where he talks about communism being a false philosophy. And he also is very much concerned with rebuilding Europe after the devastation of World War II. And he talks about plans to create entities which would eventually become NATO, for example, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And he talks about rebuilding Europe that became the Marshall Plan. Very much on his mind was the growing communist threat, how to rebuild Europe, and at the same time to deal with domestic problems at home. We were still facing adjustments after World War II, labor crises. He called for the repeal of the Taft-Hartley Labor Act, for example. A rather specific reference for an inaugural address.
Again, because of this very hard-fought election that he went through, is your sense the same as Don Ritchie's, that there was a celebratory mood in this, or were there a lot of hard feelings in this town?
Well, there's always hard feelings in the town, but I think in this case, it was a great celebration. It was really a blowout inaugural in many ways. With lots of parties and days and days of celebration. So I think that there was a sense that FDR's legacy was over, World War II was over, Harry Truman is elected on his own, and the Democrats really wanted to celebrate.
We're seeing numbers like $20 million to be spent on this year's 1993's inauguration. Do you have any sense in Harry Truman's year, for example, approximately how much money would have been spent?
I don't have any idea, and since most of the money is raised privately, it's hard to get the exact figures. Certainly the balls in those days were a lot cheaper than they are now, but I think in accounting for inflation, it was probably just as expensive to spend $25 or $30 to go to an inaugural ball then as the current prices.
Let's talk about the ceremony itself before the speech. What's notable about it? Do you remember any details?
The ceremony is fairly standard.
This was Chief Justice Vinson swearing him in.
Fred Vinson was someone whom Truman himself had appointed to the court. The oath that the president takes is in the Constitution, and that is the only oath prescribed in the Constitution. In fact, he is the only federal office holder who takes that oath. The oath that the members of Congress and the vice president take are decided upon by law by the bodies of Congress. The playing of Hail to the Chief is standard as the president arrives. In this case, the president now had a vice president, Alben Barkley, who'd been the Senate Majority Leader. The president's family always take the front row in the reviewing stand. There are usually a variety of ministers who will give an opening prayer and a benediction representing different religious groups in the country. Sometimes there's a musical interlude. The ceremony itself is not very long, but it encompasses a few notable moments of pomp and circumstance and, again, of bringing the country together.
We will note that every president is sworn in with his or someday her hand upon a Bible. Harry Truman had 2 Bibles. Why would that be?
Well, for his first inauguration, I think he only used one. In his second inauguration, or first when he was sworn in, he used one. In 1949, he did use 2. Yes, and again, that's a tradition of oftentimes using an official Bible or George Washington's Bible, or sometimes 2 family Bibles, or a personal Bible, and then one that is so dear to the family that the family members insist that that he use that one as well. So.
I have a few details about the 2 Bibles, and one was the one that he used in 1945, and the second was a copy of the Gutenberg Bible that had been presented to him by the citizens of his hometown, Independence, Missouri.
Truman was an amateur historian. He loved history, and so I could imagine that he would have taken great pride in having a Gutenberg Bible reproduction in part of his ceremony.
Do you know anything about the weather? 1949?
I'm not sure what the weather was then. I know that that's always been a problem. Historians love to write about the weather in the introductions of their books about presidents. Usually they begin with gray, cold skies, and somehow the sun always breaks through just at the moment that the president is about to speak. And this is always taken as an omen of the positive things that are to follow.
In the case of Harry Truman, I happen to know that that was a sunny day, and so he did pretty well. I don't know if the sun broke out at the moment he took his oath, but it was out that day, and the parade and everything was, although it was cold, but it was, as you might expect in January. There's been some awfully cold ones, but most of them have been in the 40s, and a lot of the weather depends on whether the wind is blowing. If the wind's not blowing, 40 degrees is just fine for an inauguration.
And also with regard to television and radio coverage, do you know anything about that for Harry Truman's inaugural?
When Truman was inaugurated in '49, it was the first time that an inaugural address had been carried nationwide over a television hookup. Television in 1949 was still in its infancy, but several millions of persons were able to watch the inauguration firsthand on their television sets. Anything
of note about Harry Truman's parade afterwards? Or of the balls that night?
No, I remember that there are wonderful photographs of Truman and Barkley in the reviewing stand, reviewing them through. Barkley was in his 70s at the time. He'd been a long-time senator and a majority leader. Barkley looked like he was having an even greater time than Truman was to some degree. But quite often what you'll see in the inaugural parade are the old friends of the president. I remember in the Truman parade that some of the Battery D men from Truman's World War I group who had been in France with him during the First World War marched along and saluted their Captain Harry as they got to the reviewing stand.
Ray Smock, you were talking earlier about the 4-point plans that Harry Truman laid out in his speech and his emphasis on foreign policy in the post-war era. What about domestic policy? Any themes struck?
Oh yes, of course his campaign. The word a fair deal does not appear in the inaugural address, but this was called Truman's Fair Deal, and the fair deal was housing, civil rights, and a domestic program that dealt with issues of poverty and Also, as I mentioned earlier, labor union difficulties. So he wanted a fair deal for all Americans, and that was the domestic aspect of the program. I must say, to follow up on what Don said about the inaugural event, the last thing that went by in Harry Truman's inaugural parade that day, after a very long parade, was an old steam calliope that was playing "I'm Just Wild About Harry." So
had that been his theme song?
Yes, that was his theme song through the campaign.
With that background by Don Ritchie and Ray Smock, we will now show you Harry S. Truman's inaugural address in January of 1949.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Chief Justice, fellow citizens, I accept with humility the honor which the American people have conferred upon me. I accept it with the resolve to do all that I can for the welfare of this nation and for the peace of the world. In performing the duties of my office, I need the help and the prayers of every one of you. I ask for your encouragement and for your support. The tasks we face are difficult. We can accomplish them only if we work together. Each period of our national history has had its special challenges. Those that confront us now are as momentous as any in the past. Today marks the beginning not only of a new administration, but of a period that will be eventful, perhaps decisive for us and for the world. It may be our lot to experience and in a large measure bring about a major turning point in the long history of the human race. The first half of this century has been marked by unprecedented and brutal attacks on the rights of man and by the two most frightful wars in history. The supreme need of our time is for men to learn to live together in peace and harmony. The peoples of the earth face the future with grave uncertainty, composed almost equally of great hopes and great fears. In this time of doubt, they look to the United States as never before for goodwill, strength, and wise leadership. It is fitting, therefore, that we take this occasion to proclaim to the world the essential principles of faith by which we live, and to declare our aims to all peoples. The American people stand firm in the faith which has inspired this nation from the beginning. We believe that all men have a right to equal justice under law and equal opportunity to share in the common good. We believe that all men have the right to freedom of thought and expression. We believe that all men are created equal because they are created in the image of God. From this faith, we will not be moved. The American people desire and are determined to work for a world in which all nations and all peoples are free to govern themselves as they see fit and to achieve a decent and satisfying life. Above all else, our people desire and are determined to work for peace on earth, a just and lasting peace based on genuine agreement freely arrived at by equals. In the pursuit of these aims, the United States and other like-minded nations find themselves directly opposed by a regime with contrary aims and a totally different concept of life. That regime adheres to a false philosophy which purports to offer freedom, security, and greater opportunity to mankind. Misled by that philosophy, many peoples have sacrificed their liberties, only to learn to their sorrow that deceit and mockery, poverty and tyranny are their reward. That false philosophy is communism. Communism is based on the belief that man is so weak and inadequate that he is unable to govern himself and therefore requires the rule of strong masters. Democracy is based on the conviction that man has the moral and intellectual capacity as well as the inalienable right to govern himself with reason and justice. Communism subjects the individual to arrest without lawful cause, punishment without trial, and forced labor as a chattel of the state. It decrees what information he shall receive, what art he shall produce, what leaders he shall follow, and what thoughts he shall think. Democracy maintains that government is established for the benefit of the individual and is charged with the responsibility of protecting the rights of the individual and his freedom in the exercise of those abilities of his. Communism maintains that social wrongs can be corrected only by violence. Democracy has proved that social justice can be achieved through peaceful change. Communism holds that the world is so widely divided into opposing classes that war is inevitable. Democracy holds that free nations can settle differences justly and maintain a lasting peace. The differences between communism and democracy do not concern the United States alone. People everywhere are coming to realize that what is involved is the material well-being, human dignity, and the right to believe in and worship God. I state these differences not to draw issues of belief as such, but because the actions resulting from the communist philosophy are a threat to the efforts of free nations to bring about world recovery and lasting peace. Since the end of hostilities, the United States has invested its substance and its energy in a great constructive effort to restore peace, stability, and freedom to the world. We have sought no territory. We have imposed our will on none. We have asked for no privileges that we would not extend to others. We have constantly and vigorously supported the United Nations and related agencies as a means of applying democratic principles to international relations. We have consistently advocated and relied upon peaceful settlement of disputes among nations. We have made every effort to secure agreement on effective international control of our most powerful weapon, and we have worked steadily for the limitation and control of all armaments. We have encouraged by precept and example the expansion of world trade on a sound and fair basis. Almost a year ago, in company with 16 free nations of Europe, we launched the greatest cooperative economic program in history. The purpose of that unprecedented effort is to invigorate and strengthen democracy in Europe so that the free people of that continent can resume their rightful place in the forefront of civilization and can contribute once more to the security and welfare of the world. Our efforts have brought new hope to all mankind. We have beaten back despair and defeatism. we have saved a number of countries from losing their liberty. Hundreds of millions of people all over the world now agree with us that we need not have war, that we can have peace. The initiative is ours. We are moving on with other nations to build an even stronger structure of international order and justice. We shall have as our partners countries which, no longer solely concerned with the problem of national survival, are now working to improve the standards of living of all their people. We are ready to undertake new projects to strengthen a free world. In the coming years, our program for peace and freedom will emphasize 4 major courses of action. First, we will continue to give unfaltering support to the United Nations and related agencies, and we will continue to search for ways to strengthen their authority and increase their effectiveness. We believe that the United Nations will be strengthened by the new nations which are being formed in lands now advancing toward self-government under democratic principles. Second, we will continue our programs for world economic recovery. This means, first of all, that we must keep our full weight behind the European Recovery Program. We are confident of the success of this major venture in world recovery. We believe that our partners in this effort will achieve the status of self-supporting nations once again. In addition, we must carry out our plans for reducing the barriers to world trade and increasing its volume. Economic recovery and peace itself depend on increased world trade. Third, we will strengthen freedom-loving nations against the dangers of aggression. We are working out with a number of countries a joint agreement designed to strengthen the security of the North Atlantic area. Such an agreement would take the form of a collective defense arrangement within the terms of the United Nations Charter. We have already established such a defense pact for the Western Hemisphere by the Treaty of Rio de Janeiro. The primary purpose of these agreements is to provide unmistakable proof of the joint determination of the free countries to resist armed attack from any quarter. Every country participating in these arrangements must contribute all it can to the common defense. We make it sufficiently clear in advance that any armed attack affecting our national security would be met with overwhelming force. The armed attack might never occur. I hope soon to send to the Senate a treaty respecting the North Atlantic Security Plan. In addition, we will provide military advice and equipment to free nations which will cooperate with us in the maintenance of peace and security. Fourth, we must embark on a bold new program for making the benefits of our scientific advances and industrial progress available for the improvement and growth of underdeveloped areas. More than half the people of the world are living in conditions approaching misery. Their food is inadequate. They are victims of disease. Their economic life is primitive and stagnant. Their poverty is a handicap and a threat both to them and to more prosperous areas. For the first time in history, humanity possesses in knowledge and skill the knowledge and skill to relieve the suffering of these people. The United States is preeminent among the nations in the development of industrial and scientific techniques. The material resources which we can afford to use for assistance of other peoples are limited, but our imponderable resources in technical knowledge are constantly growing and are inexhaustible. I believe that we should make available to peace-loving peoples the benefits of our store of technical knowledge in order to help them realize their aspirations for a better life. And in cooperation with other nations, we should foster capital investment in areas needing development. Our aim should be to help the free peoples of the world through their own efforts to produce more food, more clothing, more materials for housing, and more mechanical power to lighten their burdens. We invite other countries to pool their technological resources in this undertaking. Their contributions will be warmly welcome. This should be a cooperative enterprise in which all nations work together through the United Nations and its specialized agencies whenever practicable. It must be a worldwide effort for the achievement of peace, plenty, and freedom. With the cooperation of business, private capital, agriculture, and labor in this country, this program can greatly increase the industrial activity in other nations and can raise substantially their standards of living. Such new economic developments must be devised and controlled to the benefit of the peoples of the areas in which they are established. Guarantees to the investor must be balanced by guarantees in the interest of the people whose resources and whose labor go into these developments. The old imperialism, exploitation for foreign profit, has no place in our plans. What we envisage is a program of development based on the concepts of democratic fair dealing. All countries, including our own, will greatly benefit from a constructive program for the better use of the world's human and natural resources. Experience shows that our commerce with other countries expands as they progress industrially and economically. Greater production is the key to prosperity and peace. And the key to greater production is a wider and more vigorous application of modern scientific and technical knowledge. Only by helping the least fortunate of his members to help themselves can the human family achieve the decent, satisfying life that is the right of all people. Democracy alone can supply the vitalizing force to stir the peoples of the world into triumphant action, not only against their human oppressors, but also against their ancient enemies, hunger, misery, and despair. On the basis of these four major courses of action, we hope to help create the conditions that will lead eventually to personal freedom and happiness for all mankind. If we are to be successful in carrying out these policies, it is clear that we must have continued prosperity in this country, and we must keep ourselves strong. Slowly but surely, we are weaving a world fabric of international security and growing prosperity. We are aided by all who wish to live in freedom from fear, even by those who live today in fear under their own governments. We are aided by all who want relief from lies and propaganda, those who desire truth and sincerity. We are aided by all who desire self-government and a voice in deciding their own affairs. We are aided by all who long for economic security, for the security and abundance that men in free societies can enjoy. We are aided by all who desire freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom to live their own lives for useful ends. Our allies are the millions who hunger and thirst after righteousness. In due time, as our stability becomes manifest, as more and more nations come to know the benefits of democracy and to participate in growing abundance, I believe that those countries which now oppose us will abandon their delusions and join with the free nations of the world in a just settlement of international differences. Events have brought our American democracy to new influence and new responsibilities. They will test our courage, our devotion to duty, and our concept of liberty. But I say to all men, what we have achieved in liberty, we will surpass in greater liberty. Steadfast in our faith in the Almighty, we will advance toward a world where man's freedom is secure. To that end, we will devote our strength, our resources, and our firmness of resolve. With God's help, the future of mankind will be assured in a world of justice, harmony, and peace.